This is now part 3 of chapter 10 and the Manipulated Mind by Denise Wynn. Even Timmerman's passivity during his torture in Argentina was a consciously adopted stance chosen as a means of retaining as much control over himself, his actions, and his responses as he could under the circumstances. An everyday example of a minor exercise of control affecting one's perceptions of self and situation is the feminist tactic recommended by American therapist and feminist Betty Dodson for not being treated as a sex object. Many women dislike receiving admiring catcalls, suggestive offers, or explicit comments on their anatomy from men they pass in the street. They feel embarrassed and helpless to express the hostility they feel. Every such experience just reinforces their feeling that they are seen simply as sex objects and that they have no control over the situation. The feminist response is to act on the situation to change its natures. When men make approaches in the street, says Betty, I give them the kind of eye contact I'd give an old friend. I smile and say, "Hi, lovely day." Treat them as a mate I've known for years and make really polite conversation. The fact that he is actually contacting with me rather than at me alters his whole attitude. He begins to see me as a person rather than a sex object, and he stops bothering me. And that's from Psychology Today, UK, January 1979, page 25. By such a trivial ploy, a woman can effectually reinforce herself the conviction that she can influence instead of just be influenced by such encounters. Learned helplessness, as was shown in Chapter 4, is purely a product of faulty conditioning, and once one is aware of it, can be reversed. The fixed idea is the enemy of all free thinking. It is far more difficult to accept that two opposing ideas may not be mutually exclusive than in a desire for absolutes, to plump for one or the other. The two opposing actions may not be mutually exclusive either was neatly demonstrated by American psychologists Ulrich, Neisser, and colleagues. They demonstrated that it is possible for people to learn to read and write simultaneously without losing concentration. Their subjects were required to read short stories and at the same time take down dictation about something else. At first they found the task impossible, but after 6 weeks their reading speeds were normal and their dictation correct. To check out that the subjects had not resorted to automatic pilot for one of the activities while concentrating on the other, the researchers tested them for understanding of both what they had read and what they had written. The subjects had absorbed all the material. They could literally be more open-minded than they had imagined possible. All the studies of the American prisoners of war in Korea showed that those who had stable, integrated personalities were the least likely to succumb to communist propaganda. The important thing was to have a balanced perspective on life. Most therapists emphasize that the key to mental health is to accept life for what it is and face it for what it is, instead of working on the basis of what we want it to be. To accept life for what it is, we first have to know how it is, and that must include an understanding of how conditioning and emotions and needs and assumptions can affect our behavior and our perceptions. Only if we know that sometimes we act a certain way because we are looking for social approval and another time we react a certain way because we want attention or security, we make realistic judgments about causes and effects. Philip Zimbardo is currently working on a research project to test the hypothesis that a tendency to overlook realistic causes for inexplicable occurrences may actually be a cause of certain mental illnesses. He hypnotized a group of students to suffer an impairment to their hearing when he said a certain word. The word was spoken later during a discussion session with other students. Afterwards, he found out that the students who had been hypnotized were convinced that other people were talking about them and wanted to harm them, because it was assumed that everyone else must be whispering. Zimbardo suggests that many paranoid elderly people get that way because they don't realize they are losing their hearing. They accuse family and friends of whispering about them, and the family and friends, so amazed by the bizarre behavior, then do start to worry and talk about them behind their backs. Similarly, he says, a person may develop a phobia of lifts because one day, when he was feeling queasy, he happens to get into a lift. He then decides the lift must be making him feel sick. Many emotional problems, according to Zimbardo, could be caused by inappropriate blame. We can't be impervious to external influences. Even the weather, it is now known, can affect us physiologically and emotionally, although in our ignorance we may assume that our debility or depression is due to some other cause. Perhaps it is only by standing back emotionally and testing our assumptions that we can become more the masters of ourselves and correspondingly less the slaves of circumstance. And that ends the book, The Manipulated Mind, by Denise Wynn. I want to thank you all for joining me with this book. If you had followed from start to finish, it was an interesting book. And for those of you who like to be read to in these little clips, our next book will be The Rape of the Mind by Juste Merleau. Juste Merleau was mentioned in Denise Wynn's book, and this is also a very interesting book, and I will enjoy it immensely when I'm reading this to you. So thanks for listening, and see you in the next book.